Today's youth need teachers, volunteers, and most of all, well, they need you. I'm Doug Edwards, and I'm going to be talking with real youth mentors and students to give you the knowledge you need to be the best youth worker possible. This is Youth Worker on Fire. Hey guys, Youth Worker on Fire here again. Doug Edwards, your host, and today I have a student, one of the first students when I was working in campus life. That was where I learned about student ministry, campus life, which is a division of Youth for Christ. I was in the Orlando area, and so I ended up moving to Florida, which was not on my map in my mind, but it was definitely on God's mind. So I moved here, and as a result, I met Mark Fisher, an outstanding guy in high school that I met when I was in the South Lake area, a little place called Claremont High School. There's not even a Claremont High School now. The place has grown so much. Everything in Central Florida is growing. We stayed in touch while he was in college, after college. In fact, Mark had been a better friend to me than I even was to him. He would reach out to me when he'd come back into town. I would go on mission trips. Mark, I know you remember this. And I would forget that Mark was I think you were in Harlingen. Were you living in Harlingen, Texas?
I was on the border of Texas and Mexico as a chaplain for 2 years. Yes, I was. But you had other things on your mind. That's okay. There was nothing even to forgive.
Right, exactly. Trying to get students across the border every day and back, getting them back, period, across the border. They would build houses, and so we were busy, but still it was ridiculous. I just couldn't believe it because I would have loved to have had you out there and hung out with us. You would have loved everybody. They'd have loved you.
Texas was Harlingen specifically was a wonderful blessing for me and for Noelle, my wife at the time. Just going down there, I was, like I said, a chaplain for 2 years, and it really helped me find where God is in the midst of a lot of tragedies. It is easy to say God loves you, God is with you when everything is going fine, but I specialized in oncology ministry with minors in women's health as well as pediatrics. And when you have a young one who's struggling there with cancer, or a woman who is scared of losing her baby, you find out a lot more about yourself as well as where God is. And that program also dealt with, there would be like 4 of us as residents. If you know about a residency for doctors, they do have a residency for ministers called clinical pastoral education. And we would talk with each other. We would discuss, where did we see God? Where are the cutting edges of our faith? What are the questions that we have? What's going on with us? And it just really grew a lot through my supervisor, a man by the name of John Tier. May the Lord rest his soul. But just owe a lot to him. So it was a time of growth as a person. It was a really wonderful time. I had my son William at the time back then, and got to see him grow up. And God just blessed me through a lot of those experiences. Not all of which were fun, but at the same time, all of them were a blessing.
Yeah, I'm sure. No, I had no idea. We've never discussed this. For those of you listening, Mark and I have never discussed this time in Texas. This is all news to me, so I'm really glad to hear that. And I think most of you will be glad to hear that, because those are things that pastors to students and families especially should have, is field training like that, because I ended up dealing with a lot of student deaths, parents with cancer who died of cancer, all those things that you're talking about, I ended up dealing with no background and no prior training. It's just, here it is, there you go. And then God would have to work. So I think that would have been invaluable stuff to have had. So tell me, what was your hardest moment? What was your hardest thing that you did, or what is the one event in that chaplaincy that would probably help anyone doing any type of ministry, especially in student ministry? Was there one thing that just was the biggest aha moment for you in ministering to people that way?
I don't know if aha is the right word, more as it was kind of a somber revelation. And, a couple of the larger lessons, like I remember a young woman who had wanted to have a baby for so long, and she finally got pregnant, and then she was found to have cancer of the cervix.
Huh.
And then she had to have a DNC, and she was devastated. And then she had to go through chemo, and eventually she died. That was one of them that hit me really hard. There was a young boy whose father had accidentally ingested poison, and he was dead, and he was crying out, "Daddy, Daddy, wake up."
Oh.
And some of the real lessons just goes to show is, for so many people, we have it so well. We put God into a lose-lose situation. If things are going great, especially with where we are with our general standard of living, we say, I'm doing fine, and why do I need God in the church? And then something bad happens, and we say, God, why would you let this happen? Well, at what point do we let God win and we turn and say, God, I need you? But a tragedy, we often wait for a tragedy to look for our theology. And that's not the time for a theology lesson, because then you're grasping at straws. Yeah. And you need to have a relationship right just to help you get through and serve as a solid ground. Not that it takes away the pain, but to help you walk through it in the midst of it, not just you, but with others around you. The Bible says, you will not be tempted beyond your means, but Paul didn't write that to Frank or Sally. Mm. Paul read that to a church. It's when we're together that we can withstand things. On our own, there are things and times that are stronger than us by ourselves. And so one of the great lessons is just the power of the church, which is about relationships. It's about understanding that our theology and beliefs are bigger than we are. Not that you're going to agree with the pastor on everything that he or she has to say, but at least you are thinking and you are grounded, and it's not all that we make, because Satan will have a field day with that. The fact is, we are in a fallen world. It is not as God how intended. Why do we feel empty when somebody dies, Doug? It's because we were meant to live forever.
Yes.
And, death came into the world when sin came into the world. So why do we feel empty? Something is wrong here. It's because it is wrong. That's not how it was supposed to be. Now we have the promise in Christ that the eternity compared to what we have now is that's where our real home is going to be. We just don't see it right now, and it will be restored. But the reason we feel empty is because that was a result of the fall, which was not really how things would be had we followed the blessed plan God had for humanity to begin with.
Yes, exactly.
So that would be some of my tougher moments, and just my learning and growth through it all.
Yeah. Those are tough moments. But man, what a study in life, in human life and death. After college, Mark went to Wake Forest University in North Carolina, Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and then he later became a campus life director with Youth for Christ, and then went on into the senior pastorate after, I believe, seminary and things. So go ahead, tell us.
I did campus life for about 2.5 years in Claremont. I had big shoes to follow, but because I always looked up to you, Doug, but I became ordained as a Presbyterian minister in 1999. So I've been a ordained minister now for 26 years.
Wow. And I think that's interesting too. Tell them how you grew up. What kind of church did you grow up in?
My parents didn't totally go to church. The world is so complicated. It's not always like it seems. I had two very loving parents. I had a loving mother. I had a loving father who did not get along at all with each other.
Right.
And so on the one hand, both Bradford and I, my brother, had wonderful support and a lot of involvement. And I think that has contributed to us to having faith. At the same time, we were never supposed to talk about anything unless it was wonderful or a vacation. We weren't supposed to talk about what happened at one house to the other. So it was, we had to be the same. We were the same person at both places, but we almost lived in two different worlds. And going forth, but I generally had a pretty good high school. Claremont was wonderful to me. It was, it is nothing like it used to be. And I don't know how many people are even from Orlando area, but Florida has just blossomed. It went from a little 2-lane road with two traffic lights and a 500-person high school to now you got 5 large high schools in the area, malls and everything that are all around it. But back then it was a small little Orange Grove town. Everybody knew everybody. I felt a lot of warmth and acceptance there. We had some good kids. Class of '84 was always a special class, Doug. Don't say differently back in Claremont back in those days.
Right, exactly.
But we had a wonderful time down there. My church involvement, my mom got me confirmed in the Episcopalian Church, which I was thankful for, especially later on. I appreciated that more later than I think I did at the beginning. Most of my spiritual faith really came out, frankly, through campus life. I mean, when I was with my dad, he didn't really go to church at times, and I would go to church, and he would get frustrated because we'd have to move our golf time back because he wanted to play golf. And the sad aspect of that is here you have a high schooler going to church on his own, and I never really had either of the churches I went to ever really reach out. I never made a friend or knew anybody. I would go to church, and then I would come home, and I really wouldn't talk to anybody in the midst of all of that. And it was in campus life and the interactions that I had with you and with the others that really what was in the scriptures became alive. And I realized I have a relationship with the scriptures. It's speaking to us and we respond to it. There's the Presbyterian Church and others, and I'm going to make some general statements, and that doesn't make them necessarily correct, but this is my perception of it is, even in like the Presbyterian Church USA, overall, the people are in one area of their life and theology and relationship with the Lord, and you have a number of the leaders that have taken the denomination in a different direction. Now, the fact is the people and others have sat back and let that happen, so we can't just blame others with an us-them situation, because that's when Satan wins. But the point is I really feel my theology is more mainline than some of what gets spoken at some of the upper levels of our church. I will never forget being in a conference. We had a Peace, Unity, Purity conference, and you would have people speak these things that didn't make sense. And I know this doesn't surprise you, but I was here at a 100-member church out in rural North Carolina, and I come up and speak, and I'm just asking him various questions, and the people would get tied up in knots because the truth wins out. And next thing I knew, Doug, I didn't have one, I didn't have two, but I had three past presbyters at the General Presbyterian Church USA wanting to have lunch to me to talk to me. And, I wasn't going to tell them that they were right, but these guys had the platinum card.
Right, exactly.
Me, I just had the normal card. So I took it a bit as a compliment that apparently I was, or I would say the truth, was influencing people. But so I don't know if I have as many disagreements with most followers in the Presbyterian Church as I would some with the leaders. And I'm not going to doubt, we're still brothers and sisters in Christ. I would just say I have different theological viewpoints. I'm more traditional evangelical than some of what gets spoken.
Students helping students, just get to the right person, to the right people. If they don't have all the answers, just like Randy saying, hey, you can know.
Nobody, if you're not into youth ministry, nobody can really relate to what happens there. Because if you're trying to make Christianity fun, to help them see you can be a Christian and have fun at the same time. You can be a Christian and you can be crazy at the same time. Don't tell me at times Jesus wasn't a practical joker. And, he's fully human. They had some laughs. I would love to have had some of those moments recorded in the scriptures. But the simple fact is we're trying to bring profound truths in a way that students can understand. But if you do it right, it looks so easy. When it's not, you don't always see the fruits of your labor for years. You are thinking have you really made a difference? And you don't find out till 10 years later when the kid says, yes, that made a profound impact. You are trying to one aspect I needed to grow in back then was really communicating more with the parents. You are growing relationship with the kids, but you better have some relationships with the parents to go along with it to build up trust. I think I could have grown a little more at that. Because that was my first real aspect in ministry. We're trying to get people with campus life. You are trying to support yourself, and people have other things calling for their money. And, Randy Rainwater, who came after you, used to say, sometimes I feel like I'm raising money in order to raise money. But in truth, a couple of the great things that I learned through all of that is, one, that God would provide and take care of me if I was faithful. It was easier. It's not always easy. It was easier at times than at others, but I came in not knowing anybody. I did not have a lot of people introduce me to a lot of movers and shakers. And yet I only think I missed one paycheck in 2.5 years. God was able to provide through it all. And the other thing that campus life did was, do I really believe? Do I really trust? Because when you are at campus life, you are laying it all on the line for the Lord, because you are asking Him to help provide your means to provide for your family and for your life in a way that you don't necessarily do with the church, because they're already taking up an offering. And so there is a real, I had to really look at my life and say, okay, I say I believe. Do I really believe? Now, that doesn't mean I just go out willy-nilly, but, there's a bit of planning. And I had some people help provide a few foundations But it is a big step of faith. You are, to use an analogy out of Peter, you are walking out of the boat onto the water, and you're either going down or you're going to be up there on top of it. And it doesn't mean you may not go down into the water at times, but God kept me through it all. And so I would say, working at Youth for Christ as an evangelist, and I'm working in the community, and I'm trying to go to the school and develop trust with the school. I did have some communication with parents. I'm trying to get the kids excited, because how that grows isn't really always through me. I wasn't in the same stage of life. They are the ones who have to take the evangelical call, but at least can I help provide an atmosphere where they can feel the Spirit, because kids are hungry, and they are hungrier now than they were for just a place to talk about real spiritual things. We talk so much, Doug, in society today about a mental health crisis, but the aspect that society doesn't ever talk about is the spiritual crisis. And I don't think you can take care of the mental health crisis, without addressing some of the spiritual health crisis. And there is a void. Back in the old day, it's hard to believe the 80s were old, but they were. It wasn't as much as it used to be, but people generally still were taking their kids to church. There was an acceptance of the gospel as a society. Nowadays, we are not really a Christian society. The kids' parents haven't done that with them, and they don't know where they are. They're getting all these voices from social media. They're being taken away and isolated from one another, and they don't really have that whole sense of community. And then we wonder why people are lost. Jesus says, love the Lord with all your heart, love your neighbor as yourself, but you can't love without a community. And that's what kids, and so they are desperate to find some truth, to find acceptance, that balance between grace and truth. They want to have somebody who believes in the gospel in a world that's telling them it doesn't matter what you believe, and they know what they have isn't sufficient. They just don't know that what they need is right there in front of them. So it is a very rewarding aspect of that too, where kids are coming, not because they have to, but because they want to, if people are willing there to really feed them, not what they believe, but what is right there in the scriptures. That's some of the aspects I really took out of campus life. But campus life, young life, InterVarsity Christian Fellowships, if the listeners know some of people who are in them, offer to help support them, even if it's not a ton. Support matters, because it is worthwhile work many times at reaching places that the traditional churches haven't. And at the same time, they do desperately need that support, because they don't have the built-in foundation that some of the other ministries do.
That's right. Yeah, and we absolutely promote that here. So I'm very pleased that you brought that up and said that, because you've been a part of that.
I wouldn't be here if it weren't for campus life. And I'm going to give credit to InterVarsity Christian Fellowship in college too. I was blessed with two wonderful children, William and Llewellyn. They're about 5 years apart. And my relationship with them has always been strong. My wife decided that she didn't want to be with me, and took my kids to a different state even. And it was a very hard divorce, but they know how much I fought. We got them back. We have equal custody. And when things settled down, their mother and I, we put aside our differences and for the sake of the kids. And so, but they know how much I have worked and striven. Is that the word, striven? Strove to be with them throughout it all. So I never went through a rebellion phase either with either one of them, and they could talk with me about anything. William went to Western Carolina. He's had a wonderful marriage and is doing really well. My daughter, we found out she had a blockage in her bowels, came within about a few hours, they said, of dying. But we found it, and that she was found out to have cystic fibrosis. And she had she usually struggled with her weight. Cystic fibrosis is a lung disorder. Without getting lost in the details, you can get bacteria built up in your lungs. You are susceptible to the flu. You can't always digest your food as well, so they have to eat a whole lot more than a lot of other people. And she was very blessed. A lot of people with cystic fibrosis have a very hard time, but she lived a full life. And but sadly, she died at age 23 this past April. She got the flu in her body between the cystic fibrosis. She was underweight, just couldn't fight it. And I had lunch with her on Tuesday, and she was gone on Friday.
Wow.
And so that has left a very large hole in my heart, obviously. But if she had died the first year, as I've told you this, if she had died that first week, people look at us now and say, "Oh, aren't you blessed to have William? You're doing so great." Never would think anything.
Right.
We forget that many times that people, when we get hurt and we are grieving and we get angry, it's frankly because we've been blessed. There is a hard side to being blessed in a fallen world. God didn't take my daughter, I say. God gave me a daughter for 23 years. I thought it was going to be about 10 years longer. She had a wonderful relationship with the Lord, and I have no doubt as to where she is.
Yeah.
She knew this day was coming. I thought it was going to be about 10 years down the road. And it doesn't mean I haven't cried, and I wish with all my heart she was there, and I don't apologize to God for that.
Yeah.
Because, God put that there. But I was blessed for 23 years, and that's the reason that I'm hurting.
Yeah.
So we have to always remember. I remember a young man who was so angry at God. He was in high school, and his grandfather died, who he was really close to, and he was very angry at God for taking his grandfather. And I looked at him and I said, "Matt, you know how you could not have hurt?" He said, "How?" He said, "Your grandfather had cancer 10 years ago and almost died. If he had died, you would have been 6 and it wouldn't have bothered you at all." So the question is now, are you blessed, and how much are you happy to have been given that 10 years, even if it means you were hurting, or would you rather have never known him? And he said, "I'm so glad I had him." And I said, "That's what you need to remember."
Yeah.
And it's the same with my daughter. So there are men out there, Doug, who don't miss their daughter at all because they weren't involved in their lives.
Yes.
And I wouldn't give mine. I will always be a better person because of her. And I dedicated, when I got my teacher of the year, to her. She wanted to be a teacher. She would have been gotten her certification next year. She died over spring break. I actually did not miss a day, but in part because I am going, not that it didn't hurt. Tomorrow I'm wearing pink because it'll be 3 months tomorrow. But that's what I do, is her favorite color. So the 11th of each month, I always wear pink.
Wow.
For just to keep her spirit alive. But I gave one of my callings is to continue to be the man that she was crazy about. God gave me a job for 23 years. I was there for her. Her mother was too. It's why she lived. If you don't want somebody to suffer for 2 years in bed with cystic fibrosis or in the hospital, what's the other alternative, Doug? That is that she gets taken and we're not ready for it.
Right.
I mean, God can do all things, but statistics shows with cystic fibrosis, he doesn't. Or he normally doesn't, I'll say. And so I miss her, but I'm going to stay the man who she was crazy about.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a man who I fully believe that God told me, well done, good and faithful servant. And if I can do that, and I told you I have on her urn, I will hug you soon. And I didn't want anything depressing on there. And I tell her every day, I'll hug you soon. It may be 5, 15, 30 years. But in the context of eternity, that's not very long. And bringing this back to the youth ministry, one of the aspects of youth ministry, it is people are so much more likely to have that long-term relationship with Christ if they come to know him early on. That's why that aspect of ministry cannot be overlooked.
Mm-hmm.
She was part of a parachurch organization, Young Life, in her high school, and that made a very large difference in her, and I'm very thankful for their ministry.
Absolutely.
So that's one of the reasons it has to be needed, because it's harder. I wouldn't say it's impossible. People get stuck in their ways. One thing you don't know, my brother is a prosecuting attorney, and he's a defense attorney. He used to be a prosecutor, but he's actually brought a lot of people into the church and into the faith because they're finding themselves at the end of their rope.
Wow.
And he's opened the door for a lot of people. If ever you might even want to talk to him one day, but Bradford.
For sure.
But it really helps when people have reached out to young folks with the gospel and help them realize and frame their outlook and their growth in the terms of the grace and the justice and the truth of God in a way that people miss out on if they don't have it when they're young. The scriptures I think youth workers really could use, first and foremost, is, Matthew 11, come to me all you who are weary and I will give you rest. My yoke is easy, my burden is light. Youth workers and in ministry, and pastors need to know this too. We have a calling to serve and minister, but we are not the only people that God has called to serve and minister. We have a role to play in a youth's life to help them and open the door or knock on the door for Christ. But he's got other people too, and sometimes we put a lot of the burden on ourselves. The irony sometimes of pastors and youth workers is we are so busy trying to get people to trust God in their life and to trust Christ as Savior. But at the same time, when it comes to doing that, by golly, we're going to do it all on our own, and we don't need to trust God for that because we can do it on our own. And we don't realize the irony of that, and all we're going to do is weigh ourselves, because the work of a youth pastor is a lot like a professional athlete. The reason I say that is, one thing about professional sports that somebody once said is, what you do is never enough. Are you good enough to make the team? Fine, but are you good enough now to start? Okay, but are you good enough to win? And can you get to the playoffs? And then you get to the playoffs and they say, but can you go to the Super Bowl? And then can you win the Super Bowl? But if you win the Super Bowl, you know what they say, Doug? Can you do it the next year? And as a youth worker, what we do is never going to always be enough. There's always something extra we can do. We're not like this group, or we could do this mission, or somebody's not quite satisfied. And we've got to trust the Lord. And if it starts really weighing us down, the prayer of serenity can save a lot of youth workers and a lot of pastors from burning out. Remember that prayer of serenity, but the burden is supposed to be light. We are called to do our part, but it's not totally on us. What happens with the youth is the Lord is involved. Trust him. You're asking others to trust the Lord. Do you trust him yourself? And secondly, if it's wearing you down too much, take a step back. You're allowed to take care of yourself. You're allowed to have a life outside of the youth ministry and have friends on your own. So I would start with that one. The second one I would give, and these, I know it's not a surprise that I come up with surprising verses, but two of my favorite verses in the Bible. One of them is Mark 9, and it's when the man comes up and asks, Can you heal my son? And he said, you believe I can do this? And he said, I believe, help my unbelief. And Jesus never comes down on him. I know James says we should never doubt, but in the midst of all the world, we are going to at times struggle. And I think it's okay at times to say, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. It's okay to struggle as long as you don't let your entitled faith and the outcome depend upon that, having that answer. And so it's okay to say that at times. And that's why you have to have friends. You need to find a couple of other youth pastors, people you trust who are not right in the area. As a pastor, you love everyone, but there's a difference between a parishioner, one of your youth, and a friend. Because as a pastor, things that we say or do when we are vulnerable can be used against us. So you have to find a couple of people that you trust, that you can go to, who are not right in the middle of the area, who can be there as a support for you. When you say, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief, because they can share that with you and help strengthen you. And then I would say a third one of my favorite scriptures is from Matthew 8. And that's when the centurion comes to Jesus and says, can you heal my servant? And Jesus says, I will do this. And so they get ready to go. And this Roman says, you don't even need to come to my house. If you say the word, he'll be healed. And it says, Jesus was amazed at his faith. But when kids think of the church, they think of either Sunday school or they think of the youth group. And you need to remember, for all you youth workers, that if you want to know how vital and important it is when those kids think of church, they're not thinking of the preacher and the service. They're usually thinking of you and your youth group and your ministry. And you want to not be their only contact, because pastors come and pastors go. You want to lead them into the larger church. But that doesn't mean that you're not having a foundation. And when good things happen, when a kid says something that touches you, when you have just something really work out wonderful, thank you, Lord. When a kid comes to know the Lord, or if he comes later and says, that was awesome. I was always told, when those moments have it, write it down on a piece of paper and put it in a little drawer. And that way, when you're having those times where you're not sure if you make a difference or if it's worth it, because those days happen, you can go back and look, hey, this is where this is why I'm doing this. Because it's so easy to focus on the negative, but there has to be balance. To quote the Karate Kid, Daniel's son needed balance in his life. So we need to have balance in our faith. With the good, hard times don't take away from the blessings. Don't take away from hard times. And I do this with my daughter every night when I go to bed. I always give thanks for two things since she's died. Starting about a month and a half ago, whenever I went to bed, I would give specific thanks for two things that happened during the day, just to remind myself there are blessings in my life. Blessings don't take away from hard times, but the hard times don't take away from the blessings, but we got to remember them. And that you've got to hold on to those as pastors and in ministry in general.
I can't thank you enough for being on here. And for those of you in student ministry, I just want to remind you again, Mark was in the beginning of our student ministry, the very first, when I was learning how to reach students and families through campus life. I was with them for 6 years. I was in Claremont for 5.5 of those 6 years. Orlando sent me out there. And God had an idea. I ended up being, I was going, God, why are you sending me to this small place? It ended up being the program of Central Florida. It ended up being a place that people look to say, wow, it's working somewhere. And Mark was one of those students that, you don't know. In fact, you can expect that if you have 5 students, 1 student, 3 students that you are in touch with for the rest of your life that you've reached, or that God has used you to reach, because it's always God doing it. We do the watering. Paul talks about it. One guy does the watering, one guy does, the planting, the watering, and on it goes, the harvesting. But God God brings the harvest. God brings the harvest. And so, Mark, you are one of the guys that God said, okay, it's Mark's turn. And Doug, you get to be there. And here we are all these years later, we just get to hang out. Listen, buddy, I love you. I'm thinking about you, praying for you.
Well, I appreciate you, Doug. If it weren't for you, I might not be where I am.
Well, hopefully that's a good place all the time.
Take care.
All right, buddy. See you later. Bye.
You've been listening to the Youth Worker on Fire podcast. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and tell your friends. Also, leave a comment and tell us what you think. Stay tuned for more informative episodes.